Sells is not able to be with us this evening, so in the absence of the statutory chair, it would be appropriate for the clerk to call the roll and establish a quorum.
Trustee Peters. Here. Trustee Gallagher.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Trustee Hannan.
Here.
Trustee Evans.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Molina.
Here.
Also present Village Clerk Haley, and as Attorney Molina mentioned, President Sells is not with us. We are expecting Trustee Gisa, hopefully,
Yes.
in any moment.
Okay, so in the absence of an ordinance that establishes who chairs the meetings in the absence of the president, the appropriate thing at this point would be for there to be a motion from the floor to appoint a president pro tem for the evening. And my understanding is that Trustee Pollock is seated in the chair and ready to accept such a nomination.
I'll so move.
Then I'll make the second.
Can be a voice vote
Do we have a voice vote for?
to appoint Trustee Pollock president pro tem. Trustee Hannan made the motion, seconded
By
by
Trustee
Trustee.
Gallagher. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Take it away.
Great. We'll call this meeting to order of the Village Board of the Village of Riverside of Thursday, March 5th, 2020. We've already had the roll call, and if you'll stand as you're able and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, and our first item of business on tonight's agenda is presentations and public comment. I'd like to ask Chief Weitzel to come to the podium to present a resolution recognizing William H. Nezolowski for 50 years of service to the Village of Riverside. Chief Weitzel.
Good evening, Mr. President, Trustees, Manager Francis. It's my honor to appear in front of you with our current Community Service Officer, Bill Nezolowski, to honor him for 50 years of service to the Village of Riverside. When I stand next to him, I feel young. So I'm going to read this proclamation on behalf of President Sells, who's not here, and then afterwards I have to say a few words, and I'll have Bill step up to the podium, and he can introduce his family that is here and speak. So I'll read the proclamation. It's to William H. Nezolowski. Whereas William H. Nezolowski joined the Village of Riverside Police Department in February 22 of 1970 as a patrolman, he was recommended for permanent appointment by then Chief Donald H. Gosling in 1971. Whereas William Nezolowski was a police officer for 33 years and retired in that position in May of 2003 to become the Community Service Officer for the Police Department. Whereas William H. Nezolowski has received from police chiefs appreciation letters and correspondence from police chiefs and other supervisors, other law enforcement agencies, and citizens alike for the performance of good police work and his professionalism and helpfulness to our residents and community. Whereas William H. Nezolowski has, while serving as an officer and member of the Riverside Police Department, assisted agencies with his knowledge and performance of sign language on numerous cases. CSO Nezolowski is also well known and held in high regard by our residents and in the community. Resolved in accordance with Chapter 7 of the Riverside Code of Ordinance, I, Benjamin Sells, President of the Village of Riverside, do hereby present this certificate of appreciation to William H. Nezolowski for his 50 years of dedicated service to the Village of Riverside. It is appropriate that Community Service Officer William H. Nezolowski be recognized and commended for his fine achievement. It's dated this day, February, March 5th, 2020. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Let me say a few words about Bill before I ask him to step up, because as usual, he's very humble. But 50 years is a long time. I don't know how old I was in 1970, but young. But he's worked there for 50 years. He started as a patrolman, worked 33 years as a patrolman. At that time became community's full-time community service officer under that time was Chief Gene Karcheski. Has transitioned to part-time community service officer. He's well known in the community. In this proclamation, it said that he does sign language. I can attest to the fact that he has assisted with lost children, criminal investigations, and other incidents involving sign language for numerous law enforcement agencies, not just ours. Bill has come in the middle of the night to assist other agencies with everything from, like I said, finding lost children to assisting in criminal investigations where they needed somebody who could sign. He also served as an auxiliary police officer for many years. He's probably been in everybody's home here at one time or another. And I get calls, you know, he's the type of individual that people would call, especially when we had our own dispatch center, people would call the police department and they would ask for him personally, because they know him. So if they had just a minor thing, like they wanted us to check an animal complaint, or they wanted us to have Bill come over and handle an ordinance violation, or some type of situation with one of the kids that he would know, because he did some time working for the rec department.
Yeah.
So he really got to know the kids in the community. They would literally call up and ask for him by name, which is very unusual, and I think is very honoring. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to him. I'd like him to introduce his family that's here, and if you could address the board with anything, and then I'm going to give you your proclamation. And I was going to say maybe 50 more years, but maybe not.
I don't know if I can handle it. Talking about, I appreciate it. I thank you very much, the board, Chief Weitzel, and everybody that's here, my family. I have my son, one of my sons here, over there, and his wife, and his child, my little granddaughter, or grandson. Oh my God! I have two granddaughters with another son, and then my wife, who has also been with me, and we've also last September was our 50th wedding anniversary, and I appreciate her, my family, and I don't know what else to say. I really don't. I am moved very, and I thank you all.
Thank you.
Get over it.
You get 150 years.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. My emotions get heavy. Thank you very much.
On behalf of all the residents of Riverside, thank you, Officer Islowski. We are all very proud of our police department and all of our village staff, and we appreciate very much everything that you do for us to protect us, to keep us safe, and to enhance our sense of community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on anything on the agenda or not on the agenda at this time? I'll also ask for public comment as we go through the agenda. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to reports of village officers. As President Sells does not have a report tonight, I do not have a report on his behalf. I'll turn it over to the village manager for her report.
I do not have a report this evening either.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the approval of the consent agenda. Item 6A, approve voucher list of bills dated March 5th, 2020. Approve Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes of February 20th, 2020. Review and file Historical Commission meeting minutes of January 20th, 2020. Review and file Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes January 21st, 2020. A resolution authorizing the sale or disposal of personal property owned by the Village of Riverside. A resolution authorizing the expenditure of $50,000 for maintenance under the Illinois Highway Code. Item G, I understand we're pulling off the consent agenda.
I'd like to make that request, please.
Okay, that will be removed, and we'll come back to that. Item H, a resolution authorizing submittal of a grant application for a surface transportation program funds in the amount of $568,993 with a local match of $205,722 for the 2023 resurfacing of Woodside Road. A resolution authorizing execution of an intergovernmental agreement between the Village of Riverside, Village of North Riverside, and Riverside Brookfield High School District 208 for the enhancement of Starcom emergency radio coverage at Riverside Brookfield High School. And finally, a resolution of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, waiving competitive bidding and authorizing the village manager to issue a purchase order to Chicago Communications, LLC for the enhancement of Starcom emergency radio coverage at Riverside Brookfield High School for an amount not to exceed $67,750. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions on the motion? If not, clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Galagos.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
The consent agenda is approved as amended. The one item that was removed from the consent agenda is item G, a resolution of authorization for the submission of an Illinois Department of Natural Resources 2021 Illinois Bicycle Path Grant Program grant application in the amount of $200,000 for the Swan Pond Bike Path project. I understand, Trustee Hannan, you had some questions on that.
I did. Thank you, Trustee Pollock. First of all, I am in favor of this improvement, and I'm in favor of pursuing the grant. Just, my understanding that staff has been wonderful in pursuing these grants, which are, in effect, free dollars to the village, so don't want to do anything to stand in the way of that. Two main questions I was hoping to get more insight into. First of all, the widening of the path on Swan Pond to 10 feet wide to permeable concrete. Just had some questions on, the flooding issues, the washout issues that arise with the asphalt path. Just want to gain some insight, and I know there's been prior discussions at the board before I joined, so I apologize for bringing everybody back. Some insight on what are going to be the extra costs if we do have this permeable concrete path and we experience the same erosion issues that we do with flooding.
Call on Director Bailey, Public Works Director, to respond.
The choice of materials is kind of a difficult one. I don't think there's any perfect solution. We have a $350,000 grant from the state through the state capital program for permeable walking path. And that was one of the drivers for choosing a permeable material, because this is maybe the best use of that $350,000. The 10-foot wide part comes from a standard for bike paths. It's like a basic minimum width for them. Actually, 8 is probably minimum width, but concrete is probably the most durable, given the durable material, given the amount of erosion that occurs there, and you know that occurs in two places, really on the upstream end of Swan Pond and on the downstream end. Probably the most durable material would be plain concrete, just like a concrete sidewalk. Since we had the grant for a permeable walking path, permeable concrete seems the next best choice. So that's.
And I guess and I love the idea of permeable path. I'm just wondering of additional costs in the effect that we do have the same flooding issues that we have with the asphalt. Just if that, we have those same problems and it washes out some of the permeable path, I'm assuming those costs would fall on the village.
Sure.
And if there's been any insight into a plan to minimize that damage or what we anticipate future costs in keeping this, better materials, more eco-friendly, but still I don't want to do something that's going to cause us have significant funds.
Certainly
down the
very
line.
good questions. I think the greatest concern is on the downstream end where the culvert is. The water comes in on the upstream end for the most part, and then when the river level drops far enough, the water fairly rushes out of Swan Pond. We want to build some kind of structure down on the downstream end that is more resistant to, I think of it in terms of a spillway. That's probably not exactly the right terminology, but we want to build some kind of structure that's going to be more resistant to erosion. We do have the erosion issue right now with the asphalt path. The solution to that would be some cost for repair, and I think the way that Swan Pond stands right now, it would be subject to repeated incidents of erosion. We have repaired the asphalt several times already. I think that's just the nature of that beast down there, is it is going to have that inundation of water. The water is going to come in and sit also. So there's no way that you could say that there's going to be a time when the concrete path won't be eroded also. We don't know the forces of nature. But if that happens, certainly that path will have to be repaired. It's be akin probably to replacing a sidewalk. But there's no way that you could say it would be impervious to erosion, or that you could forever avoid replacement cost.
Okay, and I guess as, this is just the grant request phase, I guess what I would ask either the board or whatever the appropriate person on staff is that, before we undertake this, if we could just get some, based on historical data on the times we've repaired the asphalt, what do we anticipate in the next, call it 10 years, the cost of repairing this permeable path, just so we have an idea of what we're undertaking. If it's the same as repairing the asphalt, that's a non-issue. If it's more, I think that'd be nice to have the board aware.
If I may.
Yes.
Also, would it be helpful for the board to have materials related to the durability? Because obviously asphalt has a shorter lifespan, a little bit less durability than concrete.
That'd be helpful. I think that would be. It's just, again, what are our future costs that we're going into? I think, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, having this bike path down on the river, 10-foot wide path, I think would be a spectacular addition. Bring more people coming in through the downtown area, down through the village. So I just want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that doesn't, ruin that objective. The second question I had, I noted, and I'm not sure where these materials came from, but starting at page 58 of the materials, talks about an alternative path. And this is the picture on page 61 of going down Fairbank. And, I have not seen this proposal before. Maybe it was discussed before I joined the board. But I do recall several years ago that there was a significant discussion on traffic and speeding on Fairbank Road. And I believe the clocked record holder at that time was going 67 miles an hour down Fairbank. I may be wrong in my recollection, But just want to understand if there's been any discussion on the impact on that. I understand that Berry Point may not be a viable alternative because we can't add designated bike lanes, but just want to understand where the proposal for Fairbank has been and if there's been any examination of the impact that would have on the other people along Fairbank.
This was looked at, I guess, even before my tenure, but the Fairbank area is designated currently or identified as part of the Olmsted bike route in town. Back in 2017, the board explored the idea of having a designated connector to the Salt Creek Trail. And so what they identified was First Avenue to Forest and then coming over the tracks and following Blooming Bank to Fairbank Road and Fairbank then to the Berry Point Bridge to provide that connection. So the board had some discussion about that and made that recommendation, and we did actually submit a request to Cook County to have that identified as a Salt Creek connector. It was discussed by the board, it was discussed by the Economic Development Commission. Since we put forward that request, that was taken into consideration as the Forest Preserve and the area communities were going through the Des Plaines River Trail extension. So they identified that as part of a local connector, community connector to the proposed Des Plaines River Trail extension down First Avenue. Since that was what we had put out as what we would have as our preferred connector. They also identified as an alternative the Swan Pond path be widened to provide at least partially an off-street route for that community connector and kind of tie it into the river to have a kind of better user experience. So that's where the Fairbank Road connector comes from, and then the alternative being the Swan Pond path being improved.
Okay, that's helpful background. Thank you.
Any further questions, comments? If not, could I have a motion to approve a resolution of authorization for the submission of an Illinois Department of Natural Resources 2021 Illinois Bicycle Path Grant Program grant application in the amount of $200,000 for the Swan Pond Bike Path Project?
So moved.
Is there a
I'll second.
Second by Trustee Evans. Any questions, comments, discussion on the motion? If not, roll call, please.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Gallagher.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
The motion is approved. Next on the agenda is reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaisons. We have a presentation on emergency preparedness by Fire Chief Matt Buckley. Chief Buckley?
So we do have a PowerPoint. I don't know if you guys can see it where you're sitting. Hopefully you can. Thank you, trustees and Village Manager Francis, for allowing me the opportunity to come to speak with you this evening regarding disaster preparedness. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I do like talking about it. I could sit up here for a while, but I'm going to try to condense it and get through this pretty quickly. So what is a disaster? According to the dictionary, it states that it's a sudden event bringing great damage, loss, or destruction. So how do we plan for those things? Well, we put disasters into two different types of categories. We have natural disasters and man-made disasters. Some of the natural occurring disasters that we deal with are floods, earthquakes, tornadoes, wildfires, blizzards, and other geologic processes that strike our different areas. Some of the man-made disasters or incidents that we have to deal with are power outages, hazardous material spills, explosions, chemical and biological attacks, nuclear blasts, and radiological emergencies. And most of these, or some of these, do include the terrorism events that take place. Disasters can cause loss of life, loss of property, as well as a very significant economic impact. The severity of a disaster depends on the ability to recover, along with the affected population resilience. Planning for disasters is vital to the successful outcome of an incident and the ability of a community to recover appropriately. So how does this preparation begin? We start with good building codes to ensure that structures are properly built. We look at good infrastructure with our roads, bridges, water main, sewer system, which are necessary to maintain access for the responders as well as residents to evacuate areas. Plus, we want to make sure we keep our water supply and our sewer system up and running at all times. Flood mitigation. We work with our local, state, and federal partners to alleviate flooding in areas of the town that are prone to severe floods. And then we address known weaknesses such as earthquakes. Illinois, Southern Illinois and Missouri sit on the New Madrid Fault, which if these tectonic plates ever shift, we will be affected here in the Chicagoland area. Some of the other hazards that we deal with are the extreme heat or cold, large or extended power outages, water main breaks, snow and ice conditions, gas main leaks. Riverside is part of a high pressure system through NICOR now. We used to be on a low pressure system. Several years ago, they upgraded us. Tornadoes and high wind. Tonight they're calling for 50-mile-an-hour plus winds. So we might be dealing with some of that tonight also. Excessive rainfall and flooding. Incidents involving our waterway or the river, such as water or surface ice rescues, or different types of spills that occur on this waterway, as well as transportation incidents involving vehicles, trucks, trains, or even planes. We are in the flight path for Midway Airport. I know everybody likes that photo. So how do we as a village prepare for these types of incidents? We partner together. We partner not only within the village here locally, but with the county, the state, and at the federal level. This is accomplished by networking and developing relationships with these different resources. There are meetings, training classes, resource allocation, and planning scenarios which take place on a constant basis. This morning, myself and Chief Weitzel, along with some of our other local police and fire chiefs, had a meeting here at Riverside to discuss something that's a very trending topic right now, which is coronavirus, which I will go into a little bit later. So on a local level, we also have a system called auto aid and mutual aid agreements with our neighboring municipalities. On the fire side of things, we develop response assistance based upon the nature of the incident. On the law enforcement side, they do the same. They request assistance from the neighboring communities. So when an incident here requires additional resources on the fire side, we go to an organization called MABUS, which stands for the Mutual Aid Box Alarm System. In this system, we make one call on the radio, and they activate what's called a box alarm or a special assignment alarm. This brings in help from other neighboring jurisdictions, depending on what's needed. So as you can see in the photos, we've got our water rescue team. We've got our hazmat team with our decon trailer, which comes out of Argonne Lab. And in Lyons, they store what's called a ventilation fan. So if we have a building full of smoke, we can bring that out and it pressurizes the building to clear the smoke out, along with a wide variety of other equipment that we have access to. So part of our MABUS division is called MABUS Division 10. We serve the I-55 corridor from basically Forest View out to Romeoville. There's 16 towns and fire districts within this group, with Riverside being one of them. Currently in the state of Illinois, there are 65 different MABUS divisions. So the entire state of Illinois is part of MABUS, and there's 65 other districts just like ours. Currently, the state of Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Missouri are becoming part of MABUS. So Illinois was the first one that put this group together, and other states are now realizing the need for it and adopting this type of response. What it does is it pulls money in also for different equipment, specialized equipment that we might need, that other one, like the village of Riverside can't afford to have all these different pieces of equipment, but pulling your money in together and working with your neighbors, we're able to accomplish some of these things that we do need. So on the law enforcement side, they are part of an organization called ILEAS, which stands for the Illinois Law Enforcement Alarm System. They're part of the Northern Illinois Police Alarm System, which is called NIPUS, which is the SWAT team, or whenever they have a large-scale event with protesters or things like that, they do have a group that will come out and assist with that. The Major Case Assistance Team, which is MCAT, West Suburban Major Crimes Task Force, WestAF, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, which is HIDA, West Suburban Gang Task Force, WEDGE, and the Suburban Major Accident Reconstruction Team when there's a serious vehicle accident. Next, we have our other partner, which is our Public Works, which operates the same way out of an organization called IPWAM, which stands for the Illinois Public Works Mutual Aid Network. They work the same way we do. It's a phone call away to request equipment when needed. The Village of Riverside also partners with Cook County, which is a very good partner of ours, through the Cook County Department of Emergency Management and Regional Security. This organization was formerly called Cook County Department of Homeland Security. They changed the name last year to reflect more of what they do. Obviously, you can see from this photo here, this organization does provide a lot of equipment also. 4th of July, we use them for their light towers and their signboards, and we use other equipment for different events in town. They have command posts where if we have a major incident, they can bring that out. They have radios, phones, and actually a meeting room in the back of there where we can interview people if we need to, or conduct any business we have to run a major incident. All right, so our other big partner is IEMA. IEMA covers the entire state of Illinois, the Illinois Emergency Management Agency. This is a website, ready.illinois.gov, that I want everybody to look at. This website has a lot of very good information on it. They help families plan at home what to do if there is an emergency or a disaster. They give you a checkoff sheet of things that you want to have in your house, whether it be flashlights and batteries and spare water and toilet paper, everything you might need to be self-sufficient if there is a disaster or something does occur. So having that access to IEMA is very important, and that, like I said, that website of readyillinois.gov is very important. It is on the village's website also, so if you don't get it here, you can look it up on there and open it up from the village's website. So we talk about disaster and how we here at Riverside prepare for things. One of the things that, as I said, we're working on right now is the coronavirus. It is here. There was just another case in Chicago today, a patient that's at Rush Hospital who did test positive for coronavirus. He just came back from Italy. So one of their concerns was these travelers that are in other countries, because right now there's 36 countries that are affected, are bringing this back here to the United States, but it's already here. Yesterday, the state of California declared an emergency. I don't see the state of Illinois being too far away from that. It may be a few weeks till they do it, but it's something we here have already started preparing for. In fact, we started preparing for this about 2 months ago. About 2 months ago, when coronavirus was a topic that was being discussed, we started making sure we had enough N95 masks and different equipment for our responders to utilize if we were called out to that. So we did start prepping for these things a while ago. So is Riverside prepared to respond to and handle an all hazards type of incident? And the answer is yes. We work with our partners. We work with our local, our county, our state, and federal partners to make sure that we are ready. One of the things about Riverside, I think we are ahead of the game. We look down the road and see what do we need to do and where do we need to go to make sure that we are ready for any type of hazard. And we start planning for it right away. So, and we work very, very well with all of our partners. Our police, fire, and public works, whenever something happens in this town, we're all working together as one. And that's something that you don't always see. So it's very nice, and it's comforting, and it should be comforting to a village board to know that, and the residents that are watching. Are there any questions?
Questions from the village board? Well, we very much appreciate the presentation. We know we're in good hands. It is in that our fire department and police department and public works, our entire village staff is as prepared as anyone can be for such an event.
Thank you.
There being no further questions or comments or discussion, we'll move on. Thank you, Chief Buckley. Ordinances and resolutions. An ordinance proposing the creation of a business district in the village of Riverside, Cook County, Illinois, and the establishment of a public hearing in connection with the same Harlem Avenue Business District Number 2. Manager Francis, Director Apt.
Yes, I will give a brief overview for both of the ordinances for business districts, and we do have our consultant, Phil McKenna from Kane McKenna here that'll give a brief presentation a little bit more in depth on business districts and the findings that they've made. But we have been working with Kane McKenna over the past few months to begin the analysis on creating new business districts in the village. We do have one existing business district that's located on Harlem Avenue, at Long Common and Harlem Avenue. We've been working with them. I provided you with a map that kind of shows the Harlem Avenue area, so you can kind of see the location of all three business districts. The creation of a business district and the adoption of an additional sales tax will provide the village with a way to facilitate economic development in this area and budget for economic incentives and capital projects and other economic development tools such as studies or plans or marketing analysis in the targeted areas. We've identified two business districts along Harlem Avenue and Ogden Avenue. The first one we are calling Harlem Avenue Business District Number 2. It's generally located on the west side of Harlem from about Shenstone down to Lawton and does extend along Burlington west of Harlem Avenue towards Delacombe. This area includes the now vacant Bank of America properties. It also includes businesses such as Alfaro, the Amstar gas station, Comet Collector, Vault Escape, as well as some of the office and commercial buildings along East Burlington. It also includes some mixed-use buildings and their parking lots, some of which are actually zoned, partially zoned residential. This area has various opportunities for reinvestment and redevelopment. The second area we've identified is at the northwest corner of Harlem and Ogden. We're calling that the Ogden Harlem Business District Number 3. It includes White Fence Farm and Loyola McNeil Medical Building, as well as another professional building that's right next door. It also includes an R2 zoned parcel that's at the corner of Lionel and Ogden in order to include that intersection in the business district in case there needs to be intersection improvements for future development. This area is a high volume intersection and presents an opportunity for redevelopment as well. Our consultant has completed his analysis and he'll go through his findings here in a moment, but there is a process in order to be able to establish a business district, and this is the first process. First step in that process is adopting this ordinance that proposes the business districts and announces the public hearing. So we are looking at having that public hearing on April 2nd at your meeting, and this will provide an opportunity for the business owners and property owners in that area to come to the meeting. We are also proposing to hold a kind of open house for those businesses that we will invite them to, and we are looking at a March 25th date, hopefully, for that. That'll give them an opportunity to ask some more questions and get some answers on any concerns they have regarding the business district or the additional tax, and our consultant will be there for that meeting as well. Phil's here. He can go through their findings and a little bit more about business districts. And then since it is two different districts, there are two ordinances that need to be adopted, so there will need to be two separate motions for those ordinances.
Thank you. I really identify with your police officer tonight because I'm about to celebrate 50 years graduation from college. And that means I'm a boomer, so I can ask for help with any of the mechanical thing needs for this, right? You're there, of course. What we're going to look at is really business district sort of 101 in general to get you comfortable with it and see what questions you may have on it. Most of the things apply to both of the business districts. There's a couple of differences that we'll point out as we go along. One question that might be on somebody's mind is why didn't we just combine all the business districts? We couldn't. We looked at doing that, but you have too much residential in between the districts, And I think there's a legal question about whether or not you could include those, but it certainly doesn't meet with the spirit of what business districts are for, which is really to promote commercial and retail opportunities. So if I got this right, I did that one right. Business district is a contiguous area where an additional sales tax is placed just within that area, only for businesses in that area, in order to fund redevelopment of the area, either by public infrastructure improvements or by rehab to facilities, a whole range of things that could be done. But an emphasis is it's only within that area that the sales tax is levied. It can be up to 1% in increments of 0.25 as the village board would decide from time to time. What makes this a so-called blighted area, and I know that's a term that has a lot of meanings. This is the meaning under the Business District Act and no other act. It's these conditions: inadequate street layout, unsanitary or unsafe conditions, penetration of site improvements, improper subdivision or obsolete planning, conditions which endanger life or property by fire or other causes. It is those factors and the area as a whole wind up causing an economic liability. In this case, we made absolutely no findings with respect to public health, no findings with respect to safety, no findings with respect to morals. The findings here are all based upon the economic underutilization of the area. And all these factors are not present everywhere in the area. They don't need to be. It's the preponderance of those factors throughout the area as a whole. So we looked at those factors, and the plan, which is in draft form because it's still subject to your review, sets forth the specifics of the findings in there. Why would you consider? Why does anybody consider a business district? Well, if you've got underutilized businesses in commercial areas that could become more viable. So I know in your first business district, the vacancy in Title Max was a big factor in terms of it. Here you have some vacancies throughout the area, but you have what I call just an older area. And by virtue of the fact that it's older, it's somewhat obsolete in terms of today's commercial standards. You can direct the land uses and benefit all the municipality by diversifying the tax base within the area. You can put in public improvements. Sonia talked some about the traffic congestion. Eating improvements that would improve the traffic in that area as you go down Harlan, you know better than I do, would be helpful to the businesses in the area. You can fund certain public and actually certain private improvements, such as rehab of facilities for businesses that are located in that area. We put in hotel taxes because that's an option if you have a hotel, but you don't have any there, so that would not be on the table here. It helps you remain competitive in increasing your tax base and creating and maintaining more jobs in the area. And the creation of business district does not negatively impact any other taxing districts. I want to emphasize this because there's often confusion between business districts and tax increment financing. This is not tax increment financing. Property taxes do not get frozen. There's no increase in value that goes only into a municipal fund. The only thing affected here is the sales tax. Everything with the property tax is just as it is today. The assessment process with the county, the rate setting by all the districts, and the collection of the revenue by the county and then disbursement to the districts. Some communities have tried business districts. I won't run through all these, but you can see other western suburban ones, municipalities that have. Besides yourself, River Forest, Lombard, Aurora, I think has now 4 or 5 different business districts in their downtown area. What are the eligible project costs? The studies, surveys, plans, administrative costs, legal costs, anything that goes into either the formation of the business district or subsequent review of the district, for example, an annual audit. Those are all eligible costs. You can get repaid to your general fund for those costs. Any costs associated with property assembly, if that's necessary. Any site preparation costs. For example, here we found some parking lots that are in need of repaving. So if somebody wants to, if a public or a private parking lot could be improved by virtue of the business district sales taxes. Reconstruction of streets, renovation of existing improvements and fixtures, construction of buildings if that were appropriate. If somebody came in and said, hey, I'm willing to build a new building here, but my economics don't allow me to do it on my own. I want some of my sales tax, would you put that into it? You have the option to do it. Emphasis is on any project that comes in still goes through the normal village board zoning process, planning process. Any development that seeks to have some of this sales tax reimbursed to them has to go through a process that leads to a development agreement. So it's all subject to the village board approval. Financing costs, if they're necessary, or relocation costs, as determined by the village board at the particular time that an incentive is given. The designation process is adopting the ordinance which you're considering tonight for each business district plan. The business district plan is prepared in draft form, so we'll take any comments that any of the trustees or any of the staff may have on them. Publish notice of the public hearing twice in the local newspaper. Conduct the public hearing. What's on the agenda, the ordinances tonight provides April 2nd for the public hearing. It's part normally of a village board meeting. You conduct the public hearing, then you have to wait at least 14 days to consider adoption of the ordinance and designation of the plan. If you adopt the ordinance, then there's another period of time that has to go through the state for adoption of the sales tax just within that area. This is proposed district number 2. I can't read the streets nearly as well as anybody else can, but you can see it's kind of elongated from Shenstone to Lawton, and it's basically along the west side of Harlem, and then kind of comes along Burlington to the west to Del Plain. And its current uses are food and dining, retail, office, residential. We're not suggesting in our mind that there needs to be any change in those. It's how can you help those businesses that are there, and if there's vacancies or vacant land, how can you get more businesses in there? We found the economic liability here was by virtue of the improper subdivision. A lot of the planning here is residential to begin with, but these are businesses that are there, and I think businesses you want to keep there. Defective, inadequate, non-existent street layout. Obviously, the streets, it's very hard to load trucks and unload trucks in this area. And certainly, I think, to the extent that it's possible to get more turning radius, more traffic engineering, that would be helpful. I'm sorry, the Ogden Harlem, which is in the ordinances, or Business District 3, I apologize for that, is the northwest quarter of Harlem and Ogden. So it basically goes west on Ogden, same type of existing land uses. This one was particularly overcrowded with parking. There's parking on the streets. It was actually hard to do a survey of the district without, parking a couple blocks away, get out and walking. Parking's a problem that could be addressed through the business district. We had the same kinds of findings with respect to economic liability and underutilization under the Act with respect to this district. And the steps are, obviously tonight, you would consider the 2 ordinances with respect to 2 public hearings. You'd hold the public hearing at April 2nd or when you deem it appropriate. Following the public hearing, you've got a fairly simple process. Kleinthorpe would draft the ordinances. You would consider adopting those ordinances for the designation of each business district and for the implementation of a tax, a sales tax in the area. And then it would take, with the April 1 and October 1 are just the Department of Revenue's filing dates for when you have to have it done for it. So we would be in the October cycle, so they would be active January 1st of next year. So,
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
If I could ask
Trustee Hannan?
a few. In the materials, there were, each of the planned business districts had a costs identified, and it was unclear to me what the meaning of that was. I mean, obviously, it lays out identify land, but, is this gonna come back that we are gonna need to be asked in the future to fund some of those, or what's anticipated with these costs?
The plans are, you're supposed to create a budget as part of your business district plan. So working with our consultant, we came up with sort of a budget plan for whether it be site acquisition, rehabilitation programs, paying for the studies or any future studies that we may have to do in the area to try to promote economic development. So that's where those numbers kind of came from. And so it's a draft and it's in 2020 dollars if we feel like there's adjustments that need to be made, but it's not money we need to have set aside today in order to do this. You just have to create a budget as part of the plan.
But it may be something we're called upon to fund in the future?
Yes, so the idea is that you're collecting that sales tax, and so those monies can be utilized to fund the different economic incentives that fall under those different budget items.
So once you adopt the business district's plans as part of this process, you are essentially married to those numbers. So if you think that some of those numbers are perhaps a little low and looking out to the future, perhaps if you would like them to be tweaked, now would be the time to do it, because, correct me if I'm wrong, because once you have that bottom line, you can only make tweaks within those specific line items, but the total amount you'll be married to for the duration of that business district.
And
Just to add to that, just to hit the nail on the head, the total amount for each one, which is, I think, 5.5 for Business District 2 and 5.65 for Business District 3, that's the real key. It is subject to inflation each year, but that's a not-to-exceed number. If you want to change in the future line items, you can do that. So just for example, if you have money in there for land assembly that you don't need, but it turns out the public improvements are more expensive, you effectively just take from one line item to another line item.
And where were these numbers developed, or I mean, I don't need a line item, but so if I get a 10,000-foot view on where these amounts came from?
They're provided as estimates, so Sonia met with our consultant to provide some outlines, some rough estimates as to, because we don't necessarily know in the future,
That's fine.
so.
Can I just add
Yes.
something? Sometimes you have a business district or you have a TIF, whatever it is, and you already know that you need that tool in order to make a development come in, and there's already a development that's there. Sometimes you don't have anything that you actually know is going to happen, but you know that you want something to happen, and you know that the criteria are met. So in that case, you try to develop the pockets in as generic and in as flexible a way as you can, knowing that, as Mr. McKenna just said, you're only locked into that top number and you can move around within the pockets. So here we wanted to make sure all the pockets were hit and there was a reasonable amount in each pocket.
That's very helpful. And then a second question, if I may. You mentioned in Zone 2, it was mixed use, and was it some residential? I just wanted to get an understanding of the impact on that current use, and is it going to be required to change, or how does that impact the existing residents?
No, I think specifically with Harlem Business District number 2, there are areas that are zoned residential, however, they're not used residential. So there's some mixed-use buildings that have commercial on the first floor and apartments or condos above, and they have parking lots that are associated with them. Well, the parking lots happen to be zoned, residential, not zoned as part of the B1 zoning district. As far as the Ogden Harlem Business District, there is a residential property associated with that. So nothing needs to change with that. However, we wanted to extend that to be able to include the Lionel intersection. If a future development wants to come in and purchase that property and include it as part of their development, they could do that, but otherwise we wanted to make sure in case there's any intersection improvements that might need to be made there due to a development that perhaps happens at the corner, whether it be a traffic light or turn lanes or something like that, that we can include those costs within the business district there at Lionel. So the use does not necessarily need to change specifically for that.
And I guess I'm trying to look out into the future with this mixed use that currently exists there. Would the view be that possibly comes out, or is I'm assuming that's what's on the table as far as redeveloping the business district?
I think the idea of redevelopment is that we could have mixed use where it would be commercial and residential above, or it could be strictly a new commercial development just to provide more current commercial space that people are looking for.
But we would be prohibited from creating more mixed use.
We would not be prohibited from creating more mixed use, no.
Great, thank you.
Council,
Okay.
answer my question.
So, I just want to clarify one thing, that the total budget is based on revenues that are anticipated to come into the fund, is that correct?
No,
No.
not
Well,
necessarily.
it's one of two things. It's either revenues that come in, and obviously they can only be earmarked in the same way that your same process is right now, or if you theoretically can bond versus this is the future.
Correct.
Now, I can tell you that, because we also do that side of the business, you're not likely to be able to issue bonds in the future for this area, just because it's too small. It's not like, but at least in terms of the act, you can issue debt that's based upon future business district revenue.
And also, you could create a redevelopment agreement that's sort of pay-as-you-go, where you can earmark reimbursement as the funds are generated.
other questions, comments, discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the ordinance for proposing the creation of a business district in the village of Riverside, Cook County, Illinois, and the establishment of a public hearing in connection with the same Harlem Avenue Business District Number 2?
I will make that motion.
Motion by trustee Gallegos, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by trustee Peters. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Galagos.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Item 8B is an ordinance proposing the creation of a business district in the village of Riverside, Cook County, Illinois, and the establishment of a public hearing in connection with the same. This is the Ogden Harlem Business District Number 3. I believe we've already had the staff presentation on that. Is there a motion on this ordinance?
I will make that motion.
Motion by trustee Gallegos,
I'll second.
second by trustee Peters. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Galagos.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Item 8C, an ordinance amending Title I Administrative of the Village Code of the Village of Riverside with a new Chapter 24 PSEBA Benefit Administration to establish an administrative procedure for assessing and determining claims under the Public Safety Employee Benefit Act. Manager Francis.
Thank you. The Public Safety Employee Benefits Act was enacted in 1997. The act covers full-time law enforcement, correctional officers, and firefighters. For the purpose of the village, police officers are covered under this act. PSEBA requires the village to pay for health insurance for a police officer and their dependents, dependent children until the age of 25. If the officer suffers a catastrophic injury or is killed in the line of duty. To date, the village has not received a request for PSEBA benefits. However, it is prudent for the village to establish administrative procedure for assessing and determining the PSEBA claims. Last year, the Illinois Municipal League provided sample ordinances to assist communities in facilitating village code updates and incorporate an appropriate procedure. The ordinance as presented will create a new chapter, Chapter 24, Public Safety Employee Benefits Administration, and notes the process.
Thank you, Manager Francis. Any questions, comments on this item? If not, is there a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by trustee Gallegos,
I'll second.
second by trustee Hannan. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Galagos.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Next item on the agenda, considerations, item 8D, a resolution adopting a public comment policy. This was discussed at a prior meeting, and we have an ordinance in front of us. Manager Francis, do you want to review that for us, please?
Certainly. Staff implemented, based on the feedback that the board had previously provided, implemented the requested changes, which are attached within the public comment policy. If there are no additional edits, as previously stated, then village staff would request, or recommend rather, that the policy be approved, and once approved, then village staff would make sure it would be implemented at the committee and commission level as well to ensure continuity.
Trustee Gallegos?
I'll make the motion to approve it.
Motion to approve by trustee Gallegos. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by trustee Evans. Any discussion on the motion?
So just clarification, you said that this is going to be the same for every commission, is that correct?
Correct. Every commission, committee, ad hoc committee, so to have the same structure.
Sure. Okay.
And it really does not change necessarily the process. It just affords to make sure that we have a policy in place.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Galagos.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hammond.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Considerations, continued discussion and direction on the use of planned unit developments in the village and potential related text amendments. Director Apt, I presume?
Yes. Back in November, the board had an initial discussion regarding possibly utilizing planned unit developments to encourage development or redevelopment in our commercial districts. Planned unit developments, also called PUDs, are a zoning tool that's intended to encourage and allow more creative and flexible development of land that results in a better development in design than might be otherwise accomplished under the strict application of a zoning code. They are typically allowed where the development provides for compensating amenities to the village, such as additional open space, aesthetic amenities that will enhance the character of a site and facilitating the implementation of adopted village land use policies. They are considered a type of special use, and therefore they are approved by the village board after a public hearing and review by the Planning and Zoning Commission. At the time, the village board was in favor of further exploring the idea of planned unit developments, and asked that the Planning and Zoning Commission look into this further and provide some recommendations on where PUDs might be appropriate in the village. The Planning and Zoning Commission has discussed this over several meetings. They discussed where a PUD would be allowed and whether there's some parameters or maximums that should be incorporated as part of a planned unit development ordinance. The village attorney actually drafted a planned unit development ordinance for the commission in order to kind of provide a framework for facilitating that discussion and some direction about the use of PUDs in Riverside. We are really the only community in our immediate area that does not allow for planned unit developments within our zoning ordinance. The commission provided some feedback. They agreed with allowing them in the commercial districts, and after some discussion, also thought it would be a good idea to allow it in the multifamily district as well. However, they wanted to make sure single-family residences were precluded from being eligible for planned unit developments. They looked at the draft ordinance and liked many of the items that were incorporated in there as far as public amenities and characteristics that should be a part of a planned unit development. They wanted to add language about emphasizing the village's historic landmark designation, adaptive reuse of properties, and all that feedback was incorporated into a draft ordinance. They did review that at their last meeting, and after reviewing that draft ordinance and some other communities' planned unit development ordinances, the commission did recommend allowing planned unit developments in the village and recommended to the village board moving forward with the draft ordinance. You do have a copy of that ordinance in your packet that the commission reviewed. We are looking for direction to be able to move forward with a public hearing for this text amendment. Also included in your packet, which was also provided to the Planning and Zoning Commission as part of their discussion, were examples from planned unit developments in other area communities, including River Forest, Downers Grove, and Western Springs.
So if I could just clarify, so what's before you is not an ordinance that's being recommended after a public hearing, but more something being brought back to you from the Plan Commission asking, are we on the right track? Is it worth using this ordinance as a base in order to have a public hearing? It could change after that because the public hearing would get that input that really hasn't happened in quite the same way as it would later. So just to set the table for what you're being asked.
Thank you for that clarification. Any questions, discussion, comments from the trustees? Seeing none, I guess I would just comment that I find it ironic that we're talking about planned unit developments when we're a national landmark community that was a planned unit development before the term planned unit development existed. So here we are. So no discussion, comments. Do we just need a consent? I'm sorry, Trustee Hannan.
Yeah, so it's been a while since we've talked about this. Now, the planned unit of development eliminates the need to show hardship for variations that the developer may come in. Is that the general?
That is correct. What the language is that when someone proposes a planned development, planned developments always exist as overlays over an underlying zoning, which remains. as the underlying zoning, and the plan development seeks to propose something, taking that into account, and to the extent it's different, those are called deviations or exceptions, not variations. And Trustee Hannan, you're right, hardship is not one of the elements. What a planned unit development concept tries to do is to say, here's a proposal, and here's what strict application, what I could do, here's what I'd like to do. So here's where it would be different and where the village would be giving me some leeway, but here is what I would be able to do to create something better than I could. And that's just that developer's opinion. That's how the application is proposed. And if the village agrees to that, then hardship, you're right, is not one of the elements. Rather, it's the public benefit as a trade-off for those exceptions.
And just procedurally, it would first go to Director Apt in her role as Community Development Director, then to Zoning and Planning.
Yes.
And
So-
then if they approve, it goes to the board and requires a simple majority. If they disapprove, it would take a 3/4 majority to override planning and zoning?
No.
Supermajority?
No.
No, there's no, it's not the variation standard at all. It's a simple, it would go to the board as a straight up or down. It would take 4 affirmative votes to approve or to reject a planned development.
Okay, I guess I'm looking at, I guess I'm confused. Page 133.
Okay. Decision by village board?
Right, I just see that 3/4. I'm just trying to understand where that comes from. In Romanet 3.
Okay, well, in this particular version, then, that is there. You're correct, but it's not required by state law.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, I was just trying to get a bigger picture of what we're looking at, and trying to digest it. So if, again, going back, if
So
planning
here-
and zoning approves, it's a majority.
Yes.
If they disapprove, as you have drafted here, it
Right.
would take 3/4 to override that disapproval.
Correct.
And what's the rationale for that?
Well, that's the same rationale. Now, that is state law for variations, so it's required as a non-home rule for variations. And the idea is that because a variation, or in this case, a planned development, is different from what is strictly planned for under the zoning district, that if the entity that actually heard the public recommended denial, that you would not want the board to override that, because the idea is that that negative recommendation came from a body that was closest to the actual evidence. But as to a planned development itself, that would be incumbent upon you or required as a non-home rule. But in the way of, you couldn't change that for variations.
That's helpful, I'm very excited about this.
I want to go back to that 3/4 rule. Does that mean that to overturn a recommendation for denial, 5, assuming we have 7 board
Right.
members present, 5 would have to?
Correct. So if it
Not
was,
including- Not including the village president, correct?
no, it includes
Oh, it
the
doesn't.
president.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, because, and that's different too, because in the municipal code, there are a couple instances in zoning matters where it says 3/4, or it says something about only trustees, but here it says corporate authority, so it includes the village president. So it would, for example, if it were a 4-2 vote in favor, but the plan commission recommended denial, planning and zoning, you would, the village president would have to still vote, even though it's not a tie. But that vote would be needed in order to decide the issue.
I think we may want to revisit that when it comes
So,
back.
Like I said, this
Right.
isn't for approval, and I'm sorry I didn't notice that provision. This was just a sample that
Sure,
Michael Mars
sure.
gave, pulling together some of the best things from the different municipalities.
I'm not necessarily opposed to an extraordinary majority to overturn a recommendation for denial, but 3/4 of the members present may not be the right way to do it. But we can talk about that later. Other questions, comments? Do we need a motion or just consensus?
You could, I think consensus is fine. The consensus
Sure.
would be to go around and see whether everyone's comfortable with sending it back now to planning and zoning in order that publication could be made. The formal process can start.
Any objection to having the Planning and Zoning Commission proceed?
No objection.
Seeing none, I think that's consensus to proceed with public hearing, Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you. Okay, we're on to new business. Is there any new business to come before the village board? Seeing none, we have no executive session, correct? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion made.
Motion made by trustee Gallegos,
Second.
second by trustee Peters. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None? We're adjourned. Thank you.